He never fired a shot, yet he left more dead in a single year than any general in modern history. He moved without armies, rode without horses, and passed through borders and trenches like smoke. You can see his footprints in mass graves on crowded hospital cots in the silence of a funeral bell. You probably learned his name in a footnote. He is the Spanish flu. This is not a story about dates. It is about a world in motion, globalized, wired at war, and how one microscopic thing found the perfect moment to become the deadliest force of the 20th century. History often tells the story of great men and great battles. But sometimes a tiny thing writes a bigger chapter. It walked like a cold in the winter, but it killed like floodwater. Ships, trains, and troop ships, the arteries of a modern world at war, carried it onward. This plague did not respect fronts. It did not mount a flag. It rode in pockets and bellies and breathed through masks. And when it struck, it did so with a cruelty that made lungs drown from within. But the pandemic story is not a single line. To understand it, we must move like the virus itself. Jumping geography, seeing connections, watching cause and effect unfold in surprising order. Imagine a man living shoulder to shoulder with strangers in a muddy trench with no drainage, no sunlight, and no rest. Imagine weeks of cold, constant shelling, rotten food, chemical fumes in the air, and rationed sleep. That is the human environment most hostile to immunity. A soldier coughs. He coughs into his sleeve and unknowingly sprays contagion into the shared air. The man who replaces him at the front brings that same invisible passenger with him. Trenches are conveyor belts for the sick. Fresh bodies move into places just vacated by the dead. There are no pauses to stop learning and mutating. The first wave of the disease behaved like a bad seasonal flu. Sickening, slowing units, but not ripping them apart. Officers called it la grippe, but in the chaos of 1918, that word was a code for something that could not be paused. And when the virus rode the troop ships back home, it did something evolution favors. It met new hosts, faced new immune systems, and sometimes changed. In the trenches, the conditions were a crucible. The war did not create the pathogen, but it offered ideal conditions for it to become deadly. What a mild wave began to do in the trenches would soon return as something monstrous. Epidemics travel along human veins, shipping lanes, railways, and troop trains. In 1918, those veins were wide open. More rarely told is how politics, prejudice, and speed of mobilization helped move the disease faster than any army could march. A single cattle car, locked and crowded, crossed Canada bound for Halifax. Its passengers were so tightly packed they could not move. What began as coughs in one car became a wave moving through others. Tobogganing across oceans, it would reach Europe, then all corners of the globe. The world's infrastructure, the very technology of modern power, became the virus's transport system. At the same time, many governments chose secrecy. Wartime censorship suppressed headlines because leaders feared mass panic worse than an epidemic. Neutral countries free from propaganda bans told the truth. So people called it the Spanish flu. Spain simply had the misfortune of being honest. But naming is not science. It is a story. And the real story of where the virus began remains an unsolved web of threads. Labor Corps and train cars, small rural outbreaks in the American Midwest, and icy villages in the far north, scientists raced not to the finish line of a vaccine, but to understand what they could not see. At the time, microscopes revealed bacteria. Viruses were invisible gremlins. Labs converted into military units. Men like Dr. William H. Welch became, in effect, battlefield commanders in white coats. They chased the wrong suspect at first. A bacterium discovered years earlier seemed to be everywhere. So researchers produced horse serum vaccines, not knowing that they might be firing at a ghost. They tested antitoxins, drained infected lungs, tried oxygen, and improvised surgical interventions that would later seem like the first drafts of modern intensive care. Yet medicine did not stand powerless. While it could not stop many from dying, it bought time. Nurses, not just doctors, saved lives with constant care. Simple things, warmth, hydration, and human presence, mattered more than heroic drugs that did not yet exist. Viruses mutate. Sometimes they get weaker, sometimes they get worse. In 1918, the first wave was deceptive. It lulled the world into thinking this was another seasonal disease. Then the second wave returned in autumn like a hurricane with a new eye, faster, crueler, and shockingly lethal to those in the prime of life. Hospitals filled faster than bodies could be carried away. Men turned blue from within, lungs full of frothy fluid. Some died within 24 hours of symptoms. In city after city, prisons, tenements, and army camps became mountains of the sick. The epidemic was not selective by class. It was indifferent, and in some places merciless to the young. Philadelphia's Liberty Loan Parade, massed crowds, patriotic pageantry, would become one of the worst public miscalculations of the pandemic. When authorities allowed public gatherings to continue, the virus found a banquet of hosts. The pandemic's geography reads like a map of pain. In India, entire villages cremated so many bodies the rivers choked. In parts of Africa and the Pacific, isolated peoples, with little previous exposure to similar pathogens, were decimated. In Fiji and Tonga, entire generations disappeared. In the Arctic, native communities saw villages emptied overnight. These were not merely statistics. Languages were silenced. Labor systems broke down, economies staggered. The virus rearranged political fortunes in the margins. It pushed colonized populations toward movements for independence because imperial authorities often delivered neglect instead of care. Choices matter. In a few cities, decisive quarantine, aggressive public health measures, and candid communication saved thousands of lives. In others, denial and the need to keep morale for the war proved deadly. In many capitals, leaders prioritized the war effort over civilian safety. Troop movements continued. Parades were held. Presses buried news. The result? Preventable carnage on city streets and empty coffins piling in wagons. These were not just science failures, they were political failures. Mistrust flourished. Conspiracy theories took hold. People blamed vaccines, the enemy, and anything that allowed them to explain a chaos that otherwise had no face. Amid the horror, human kindness became the only story that consistently saved lives. Nurses who never left bedsides, clergy who arranged burials when towns were empty, neighbors carrying the sick to makeshift hospitals. Their small acts mattered. We remember the generals, but not the nurses who lifted the dying's heads. The volunteer drivers who became ambulance drivers, the laboratory technicians working days without pause, and some who survived carried wounds forward, both physical and psychological. Whole families were hollowed out. Many soldiers returned from overseas to find no one left waiting at the station. When the war ended, the world wanted new stories. Victory, return, reconstruction. The pandemic's terror was folded up and put aside. Mourning became private. Nations preferred to speak of political rebirth instead of infection. But forgetting is dangerous. The 1918 pandemic left lessons about surveillance, the need for honest government messaging, the value of public health infrastructure, and the importance of global coordination. It also left a cautionary tale about the limits of our hubris. Medicine had progressed, yes, but not far enough to stop a microscopic predator matched to the speed of modern movement. By studying 1918, we do more than honor the dead. We sharpen our defenses. We remember that modernity's advantage, connectivity, is a double-edged sword. If there is a last image to hold, let it be this: a nurse standing in a rain of falling ash from funeral pyres, a single hand reaching out to hold another. Small acts can push back a plague. And memory, careful, stubborn memory, is our best prophylactic. If this episode moved you, subscribe for more history that looks back so we can move forward. Tell us, do you think history forgot the pandemic on purpose? Or because human memory is fragile? Comment below. If you want to dig deeper, we'll link primary sources and further reading in the description.